This week's surveillance report covers the dangerous reality that social media bans are age verification. We can't have the good without the bad. India's push for even more invasive phone surveillance, a massive vulnerability actively exploited against major companies, the EU's new proposal to gut GDPR protections, Petco's escalating security disasters, border agents charging people for protecting their data, and more. We have quite a week for you, and I'm quite excited to get into it. Welcome to the Techlore Surveillance Report, your essential weekly tech news, delivering deep analysis on the latest threats to security, privacy, and digital freedom. No time to waste. Let's get right into the main story. I've been seeing this really being shared around a lot. Australia is the first major country to have a federal social media ban for teens. And I want to start off by saying something very direct. I do not like social media platforms. I think they are extremely bad for everybody, not just children, but adults as well. We have seen for years now evidence that these are harmful platforms to everybody's mental health for more than one reason. In fact, we have internal research done by Facebook internally. This is their own researchers that found their own platform was harmful to teens. And then they chose to ignore this and change nothing about their platform. These big tech companies are directly incentivized to do anything possible to keep you engaged on the platform. Profits are above everything else. And so I fully understand why people want to prevent kids from being on these platforms. And I'm not alone. According to CNBC here, they have this YouGov survey that found 77% of Australians backed the under 16 social media ban. Supporters of the bill are arguing that it safeguards children from social media linked harms, including cyberbullying, mental health issues, and exposure to predators and pornography. This has some serious privacy concerns, and I think people aren't really discussing how these social media bans are actually done. The only way to tell who is a child or an adult is by age verifying everybody, including sometimes adults. In fact, this was published on Reuters a few months ago that Google specifically said back then that Australian law on teen social media use is extremely difficult to enforce for this very reason, because they have to roll out some way to age verify users and not make them more vulnerable to the exact laws meant to protect them. And this is something I've been covering on the Techlore side of things for months now, how age verification laws ironically can actually create far more privacy risks to children than they try to prevent. I'll cover more of EFF's resources in a second, but I do want to just quote a really good take that they have already. And this is a quote: "We all want young people to be safe online. However, age verification is not the silver bullet that lawmakers want you to think it is. In fact, age gating mandates will do more harm than good, especially for the young people they claim to protect. They undermine the fundamental speech rights of adults and young people alike, create new barriers to accessing vibrant, lawful, even life-saving content, and needlessly jeopardizing all internet users' privacy, anonymity, and security." So that is a objective downside to these laws, regardless if you think they should pass. I hinted at this earlier when I was doing coverage that it's questionable if these will even work, and it's true. Like, some kids are already getting around this stuff. So this is an article from ABC that age verification errors are seeing some under 16s retain access to the banned social media platforms anyway. They are using VPNs, they're using fake IDs, they're doing all these different things to try to get around it. And even if the age verification does work, we are seeing some children just shift to different platforms like Telegram or other places that is not necessarily inherently keeping them safer from the risks that these kind of laws are meant to protect them from. So you might be asking, well, Henry, what are you even proposing? It sounds like there's no pleasing you. And I actually think that this is what needs to happen. And this is a direct quote from CNBC. This isn't from me, but this is what I've been proposing myself on the channel, on these podcasts for years now. Quote: "The most effective way to protect children and young people online is by protecting all social media users through better regulation, stronger data protection laws, and better platform design." And that's from the Amnesty Tech Program Director, Damini Satija. I hope I pronounced everything there correctly. This is what really matters. I don't think that this is actually a net gain for society if children just avoid these platforms altogether, or they use workarounds to access them anyway, but the platforms are equally toxic to everyone anyway. And then when they turn 18, they can just join them and now everything's fine. That's not actually how it works. I really push back on a lot of this narrative that social media platforms only harm children. I think they harm everybody. I think everybody is susceptible to doom scrolling, to being emotionally manipulated, to being mentally manipulated into misinformation and all these different platforms that these social media platforms have. I don't think this is a child specific problem. And until we actually decide to deal with the root problem of these social media platforms, the problems that are coming from them are never going to actually go away. And the way that we're trying to deal with this is very short-sighted and is introducing new risks for also everybody, because now everybody, including some adults, might have to start uploading personal information that they otherwise would have not had to upload to these same platforms that aren't even to be trusted in the first place. So this really is a double whammy kind of suckiness that's going on here, where not only are we not dealing with the root problem, we've actually made the root problem in some ways a lot worse. And it's easy to pick on Australia because they were the first ones to do it, but we have Malaysia, we have New Zealand that's looking at this stuff. We have the EU that's also considering this. So this is happening globally. I just covered a video on Techlore about how half of US states now have age verification in place as well. Like, age verification is the new thing right now that we need to be very careful about. And the problem is that it's being presented right now as social media bans from teens, which sounds very good. Again, I think it's overall a really good concept, and I wish there was a way to keep teens off of these platforms because I don't think it's beneficial for them, nor is it for adults. I think keeping everyone off social media platforms is actually a net win. But these age verification laws are now being presented in a way where 77% of people in a country can actually get behind them. But if we actually take these and present it fairly, which is, hey, are you okay with age verifying everybody on the internet? And then we kind of decide what platforms they can access depending on that. And that means you also have to, submit your information as well. If it was presented that way, I think people would be a little bit more critical of this stuff. I have two more quick little notes here on the age verification stuff before I get into the React, India, and other updates that we have today. The EFF actually put out a really good blog. Of course, this is all in the show notes, as always, but they're launching a age verification resource hub at eff.org/age. And if you're watching the video, you can see what this looks like. If you're in audio, check out the show notes. This resource hub has a nice little table of contents that you might be seeing on screen here that just kind of details what's going on and what the stakes are, why this is something worth fighting about. And I think this is really important because, again, people are only being presented the positive of age verification laws. And again, those are hypothetical positives. I kind of shared some of the issues with this stuff in the first place and how it's avoiding some root problems. But even if we assume that it's all positive, there still is a ton of negative that's not being discussed, and a lot of bad things this can enable, like censorship, age verification, surveillance systems, online versus in-person ID checks, and gatekeeping important information from different demographics of people. It's pretty scary stuff when you actually look at the consequences. And finally, Tuda, the encrypted email provider, put out a really good blog too. That's kind of a small update here. So chat control is the EU's attempt to ban end-to-end encryption, which is it's still chat control, but now it's kind of morphed into an age verification law with optional. It's this kind of crazy mess. There aren't any significant updates since last week's surveillance report, so I'd go back and listen to that if you want to hear the newest updates on that. But Tuda did put out this nice blog article that kind of covers some of those updates as well. And they also cover that this is now kind of an age verification fight over in the EU as well. So this is a global thing. And I just again covered the US. Half of the states now have some layer of age verification laws as well. That's half the country. So really scary stuff. Keep fighting. Check out the resources. So coming soon, we have India pushing for greater phone location surveillance. But in the meantime, I wanted to quickly touch on the React vulnerability. But this was a high severity exploit that impacted a ton of different things that pretty much relate to the infrastructure of the internet, many of the sites you use. And I pretty much said I'm kind of expecting this to carry over into being stories that we cover for the next few weeks. And this is the first week of that. So the first thing is that the React to shell flaw was exploited to breach 30 orgs, and that includes 77,000 IP addresses that are vulnerable. So again, this was an unauthenticated remote code execution vulnerability, which could be exploited via just a single HTTP request. And so pretty much anybody who uses the React server would be able to be exploited using this. If you are a developer or you know a developer that hasn't patched this yet that uses React, please, please, please get that fixed ASAP. Tell them to update React to the latest version, rebuild their applications, and then redeploy to fix the vulnerability. It's that simple. Now, in the past 24 hours, they recorded many distinct IP addresses attempting to exploit this flaw. So there is a widespread attempt to try to exploit anybody who's using this. And so again, it's very vital that if you or anyone you know is dependent on this in any way, you should patch this ASAP. And this isn't just for that. So Cloudflare, you might have noticed, this was not as big as an outage as the one we covered a few weeks ago, but Cloudflare did have a temporary outage, and that had to do with their attempt to patch this vulnerability. They said it was triggered by changes being made to their body parsing logic while attempting to detect and mitigate an industry-wide vulnerability disclosed this week in React server components. So just a fun little update there if any of you had to deal with that outage and what caused it. Now I'm going to talk about India's new attempt at implementing some crazy form of surveillance, continuing after last week. And then just a little teaser. Later, we have the EU's new digital package, which tries to undermine GDPR in really core ways. And we also have Petco's data breaches, which is a quite interesting saga. And a man was charged for wiping his phone before a border search. And of course, we have our typical defense bulletin where I cover all the data breaches and all the updates to services many of you use to try to avoid kind of the typical tech companies. In the meantime, let's dive into India. So last week we talked about how the Indian government they made a proposition where every phone, even ones that you already bought, had to have an app on there that was there for people's security. I have air quotes for those listening. Yet it collected a ton of private sensitive information and it was required to use on all devices. There was no way to uninstall it. There was no way to buy a device without this on there. Now, they walked back on this after public outcry and said, well, we never meant it was mandated, so it's actually optional, so you can install it if you want to. So that was a big backtrack, even though they did formally say at first they wanted this to be mandated. Now, the update this week is that India is weighing a different way to surveil people. So right now, what we see is if someone commits a crime, what they'll do is they'll go to cell companies and they get cell tower triangulation to get an overall location of a person's phone number to try to see, oh, this person was here at this location at the time of the crime. Therefore, this is evidence that they were there and we can use this to prosecute them. Now, the administration is saying that they don't think it's precise enough. And so, what they want to do, they propose that precise user locations should only be provided if the government orders smartphone makers to activate a GPS technology. A is part of the word there. It's not a GPS technology, it's capital A GPS technology, which uses satellite signals and cellular data. This would require location services to always be activated in smartphones with no option for users to disable them. A lobbying group from Apple and Google wrote a letter and said that this GPS network service is not deployed or supported for location surveillance. That's not the functionality and the reason those tools exist. And they also said this measure would be regulatory overreach. So you might be wondering, what is this typically for? And this is actually kind of why this is in some ways really evil, because this feature, AGPS, which is the technology, is typically only turned on when certain apps are running or when emergency calls are being made, which could provide authorities with location data precise enough that a user can be tracked to within about a meter. This proposal would see phones operate as a dedicated surveillance device, though. So they're weaponizing something that otherwise is used for overall not a bad thing, and they're trying to make it being used for this really bad weaponized surveillance state style like mandate. It's pretty creepy stuff. And I think people should be really outraged about this and doing everything they can because this is horrifying. It's also sadly not that surprising. We've seen the Indian government do a lot of things recently to try to force surveillance on their citizens. And this is not good. I mean, we just covered last week as the highlight story how they tried to mandate the app. That didn't quite work the way they wanted it to. So now they're trying to push this. And if this doesn't work, I would expect something else to be attempted. I think we need to be very careful and we need to also be fighting back against all of this stuff. So if you're in India, make sure you're getting active, make sure you're contacting your representatives, make sure you're also educating the people around you. This is really important stuff. Not only do we not want you all to have to deal with the repercussions of this, we also don't want you all to start any trends for this stuff in other places too. So this is a very global fight and we need to be looking out after each other. Really quickly, I wanted to shout out the fact that we could not do this podcast without the countless supporters that make all of this content possible. Our independence depends on countless supporters like all of you, which allows us to sustain this high quality analysis and research, maintain independence, and try to eliminate as much external influence as we can, continue expanding our work to reach more people, and also directly fund our small two-person team. There are many free ways to support us by just engaging, following, sharing with people you know, and shopping using some of our affiliate links. And we also have paid support, and we are now fully in on Ghost. And so if you've wanted a way to become a member and become a Techlorian and get access to our Signal group and all of our different perks, you can do that now, all via Ghost, and it's all directly done through Stripe. No middlemen like Patreon that take fees from us and also take data from you. It's just open source Ghost and Stripe for payment processing. And you can also even send tips nowadays. We still, of course, support Monero, and we have other things like YouTube memberships, GitHub sponsors, and just PayPal as well. If you want some fun ways to support what we're doing and make this kind of content possible for all of you. I want to thank all of our current Techlorians. You guys are all freaking awesome, and I just can't express how grateful I am for all of you. And if you want to join the fight, you can check out how to do that by becoming a Techlorian down in the description. Otherwise, just enjoy the rest of the podcast and be sure to take something away from it and share it with people you know, and I'll be just as happy if you do that. Now, the next story is about the EU's digital omnibus, and I've already covered this on Surveillance Report, and I've made a dedicated video about it on the Techlore side of things. I'll leave all of those linked below, but I do want to do a quick check-in if you haven't heard of it yet, or you don't know any of the updates regarding it, and I think the EFF has the best coverage of this. So first, you might be wondering, what is this digital omnibus package? Well, what this is meant to do, and the way it's being presented, is as a way to simplify EU privacy law. It historically has what's called GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, and it is overall regarded to be a very good piece of privacy legislation that has given the most amount of privacy protection to users anywhere in the world. In fact, many of the countries that have privacy regulation nowadays modeled what they did after the GDPR, and I think California is a really good example of this with their privacy regulation. Now, the digital omnibus is trying to rewrite some of the ways that GDPR currently exists, and it's mostly not a good thing. Now, let's start with the positive, and I did cover this on Surveillance Report already. There is one idea, which is to improve consent rules so users can automatically consent preferences that will apply across all sites. What this is talking about is cookie pop-up notices. So this is what you guys probably all see on the internet, where you access a website and the website goes, oh, do you want to accept cookies? Do you want to be tracked? Click options. And then there's 8 buttons, and then you have to click all of them. It's really unintuitive, and each site has a different way of doing this. So this actually sucks for everyone involved so hard that they actually decided this needs to be improved for everybody. This sucks for website maintainers because they have to actually implement this stuff and they have to do all the technical nonsense to make that work. And then it sucks for people too. It's not intuitive for users. And so they are simplifying it. And the way that it's been proposed when I read it last is that this is a browser wide option, so that you and your browser go in and you set whether or not you want cookies to be used for tracking, etc. And then websites have to respect that, which I think is actually a really good way to do it. Assuming sites do respect it, I guess we'll see what that looks like down the road. But this omnibus has a lot of negative things, and I think it's really important to kind of frame the context in which it's being presented as. It's a call to boost productivity and support innovation. Businesses have been complaining about GDPR red tape since its inception, and new rules are supposed to make compliance easier and turbocharge the development of AI in the EU. Simplification is framed as a precondition for firms to scale up in the EU, ironically targeting laws that were also argued to promote innovation in Europe. It might also stave off tariffs the US has threatened to levy, thanks in part to heavy lobbying from Meta and tech lobbying groups. So that's all a quote from the EFF, and I think they did a good job to really paint who this new evolution of the GDPR, if we want to call it an evolution, is meant to serve. So what does this change and what does this weaken? The first is that it narrows the definition of personal data. Today, information counts as personal data if someone can reasonably identify a person from it, whether directly or by combining it with other information, but this gets rid of that simple test in favor of a variable one. Whether data is personal depends on what a specific entity says it can reasonably do or is likely to do with it. So that means that companies kind of can decide what's personal and what's not personal. The second major change is it treats AI as a privileged, quote, legitimate interest. What this means is that AI doesn't even fall into the same camp and it doesn't have the same rules that other services do. That is extremely concerning because we see all of these companies nowadays who have a note-taking program and then they become an AI note-taking program, and now everything's AI, even though it's the same features you got access to that weren't called AI for like the last 10 years. But now that means because it's AI, they theoretically can fall under a different set of requirements that aren't as privacy respecting to the user. And if your feature is actual real AI, that's still not good, because another amendment would create a new exemption that allows even sensitive personal data to be used for AI systems under some circumstances. And it kind of talks about how vague this is. A lot of these are quotes from the EFF that I'm showing on screen if you're listening to audio and want a little bit more context there. And I'm going to just directly quote the EFF on this because they summarize it really well. There are additional adjustments, many of them troubling, such as changes to rules on automated decision making, making it easier for companies to claim it's needed for a service or contract, reduced transparency requirements, less explanation about how users' data are used, and revised data access rights, which is supposed to tackle abusive requests. And then they link to an extensive analysis by NGO Noib, which can be found in the link. And this was put out a little more than a week ago if you actually want to dive into all of these changes yourself. Now, there is somewhat good news here, which is that this is not a done deal. This is still being debated, this is still being discussed, and you can still make a difference. So if you are in the EU, contact your local representatives. Please get active in this fight. And of course, I'll leave links to everything in the show notes so that you can see how to fight for this. And if you all want more dedicated resource, let me know and I can make another dedicated video on that. We have another story, which is a man who was charged for wiping his phone before a border search. And then after that, we have the defense bulletin, which covers all the data breaches and service updates. But we have a really rare data breach story that actually made it into what I consider a main story because it was an interesting saga and it's quite quick. So I'll go through this very quickly. But Petco is a pet store. It's a chain pet store. It's very common in the US. I don't know if it's global or not. But they had a data breach. And this started about 6 days ago on December 5th. And it pretty much started with zero information. They just said, we have a data breach. We don't know what's going on. We don't know how many people are affected. But they did say from the get go, we'll go ahead and give you guys free credit and identity theft monitoring services. Cool. Thank you for that. I wish I was caught in that data breach so I could get access to that myself. Obviously, sarcasm. That is just the staple thing that everybody offers nowadays. And it does not excuse poor security, which is what I think these companies think it'll do. Well, it came out 2 days later on December 8th that they experienced a data breach involving customers' personal information and really sensitive stuff. And it included names, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, financial information such as account numbers, credit or debit card numbers, and dates of birth. That is horrendous. I don't even know why a pet store needed socials in the first place. I'm curious why those were collected. I don't know if those were employees. I don't know if there's like some financing thing they do or what. But this is crazy. And the fact this wasn't properly secured in any way is quite embarrassing for this organization. And it's important to mention they have 22 million customers too. So it's unclear like what number is affected by what kind of risk. But now the latest update, this came out just yesterday. Petco has now taken Vetco website down after exposing personal information. And Vetco is like their vet, I guess, service that they offer through Petco. As you might be able to tell, even though I have 2 dogs, I am not a frequent Petco shopper. I do like PetSmart and I do like Pet Food Express. So those are kind of my go-to pet stores personally. Sorry, Petco, but it looks like I dodged the bullet this time. So you might be wondering, wait, this is part of the same data breach we just talked about, right? Well, no, this is a totally different breach. TechCrunch actually found the data spill. They found this vulnerability and they reported it. So this is a totally different issue. This made it possible for anyone on the internet to access sensitive customer files directly from Vetco servers by just modifying the web address to input a customer's unique identification number. That is crazy, and they do talk about how this is a common bug. It's called insecure direct object reference, and it's something that is very easy to prevent, and most people do prevent this, and it's a pretty elementary thing for them to get wrong, which I think given the way that Petco is responding to these incidents and kind of how basic some of these issues are that they could be preventing, I think it's fair to say this is a company that needs to up its game when it comes to the security side of things. Now, TechCrunch actually says this is the 3rd Petco breach of the year. They had one earlier this year which is due to Salesforce. And what's weird here is they say in September, they disclosed a second data breach. And that's the same one that we actually just covered, which was only discussed on TechCrunch last week. That's the first stories I was sharing with you. But if I do Control F on the page, there's no mention of September. There's no timelines. And so it's a bit clear if that's a mistake in the first reporting or how recently these things happened. So for me, Petco gets 2 massive thumbs down because this is quite an embarrassing way to not just have these problems exist in the first place, but also their way of handling it. Big thumbs down, Petco. And if you are a Petco customer, please look at these resources and see what you need to do to protect yourself. And now the last major story before we get into the defense bulletin. There was a man who was arrested for allegedly wiping his Google Pixel before a CBP search. Now, this is a pretty interesting one, and it gets into more of the legal side of privacy and security with a lot of nuances, so I'll do my best to get this right. So he was charged with destruction of evidence after allegedly erasing the contents of his phone before a Customs and Border Protection agent could search it. I'm going to go ahead and quote TechSpot on this. I will also leave 404 Media, who I believe has much better coverage for this, but it's, you have to log in to access it, so I'll leave both sources in the show notes. But they say many Americans assume that if they wipe a phone or lock it with strong encryption, they're simply exercising their privacy rights. But the moment an electronic device becomes the target of a lawful federal search or seizure, erasing it can itself constitute a crime, even if agents haven't yet obtained physical possession of it. They also briefly mentioned the law surrounding device unlocking is also concerning. Courts generally allow agents to compel biometric unlocks such as fingerprints or facial recognition, which are treated as physical identifiers. So there's 2 really important takeaways that I have for people from this story, right? And I don't know if this person did something wrong or what, if they were trying to hide anything or if they just don't want their information to be searched by people. Like, whatever the reasons are, these are two really important take-home messages that have been shared over the years. The first is the concept of plausible deniability. What this means is that if you get a notification that says, hey, we are going to go investigate your phone, and then now you go and change something about your phone, like you wipe your phone, you add a different password to it, you can now be charged for exactly what this person was charged for, which is destruction of evidence, and they could go after you for that. However, plausible deniability means you already proactively were doing something and you didn't have any change of behavior. So, what plausible deniability would look like for this person? I know this is totally unrealistic, and I'll give more realistic examples soon, but let's say this user did routine device wipes every day, like 8 a.m. every day. The phone was just wiped automatically. There was a script that automatically ran, and this has been going on for over a year. He could actually establish plausible deniability and say, yo, this is something I've been doing forever. This wasn't actually anything I changed. And that's just something that was done by default. Now, where we see this actually play out in a more realistic scenario is typically with end-to-end encrypted messengers. If you're in a company and you start a conversation in a Slack group, and then you go over and discuss something else on Signal in private, that might actually be considered a destruction of evidence. But theoretically, if all communication all took place over Signal by default with 4-week disappearing timers by default, then that's just the way they do business, and it wouldn't actually be considered destroying evidence. So it's the small legal nuance, and I'm not a lawyer, so if there are any lawyers who want to add any more nuance or corrections, go ahead and leave it in the comments. But this is a really important concept to understand when it comes to this stuff. The second thing that they talk about, which is also really important, and we've seen many stories of this over the years, is that passwords and biometrics are not treated the same way legally. You have a greater Fifth Amendment protection with passwords and passcodes, but your face, your fingerprint, those things aren't as well protected, and so they can make you use biometrics to unlock devices a bit easier, and you have less legal protections. Does that mean you need to disable all biometrics on your devices today? No, it's just something to be aware of. And if you're traveling, maybe you temporarily disable biometrics. Maybe you just memorize what it looks like to quickly lock your device, because there's normally a lot of shortcuts, which will pretty much force you to have to type in your password again, like on the iOS side of things, if you trigger SOS mode. And even if you leave it, or if you just try to turn off your iPhone, and even if you don't swipe to power it off, you'll notice you have to type in your password again. So you can kind of memorize some of these triggers so that in any situation, you can just quickly trigger that. So that way you don't have to be forced to unlock a device, and there's nothing that you're doing wrong necessarily there. So yeah, really interesting story that gets into the legal weeds of things, but let's get into the defense bulletin so we can quickly go through these updates. So the defense bulletin, we always start with the data breaches and threats, and then we kind of talk about just overall service updates and more positive things. So the first one is from Krebs. He just talks about SMS phishers are pivoting to points, taxes, and fake retailers. So if you start seeing an uptick in messages that link to sketchy looking websites and all these different things, please be aware of this and try to just double check any links that you click, and definitely check out the sources to make sure you see what this looks like. There was a security flaw in the messaging app Freedom Chat, which I don't know very well, but it presents itself as a secure messaging app. So if you use that app for whatever reason, look into that. I highly recommend checking out Signal, Session, SimpleX, etc. on our website's resources. I'll leave our site below so you can check out all of the tools that we recommend for all of you to use. The Predator spyware is using a new infection vector for zero-click attacks. Zero-click means, yes, you don't have to click anything. It just hacks you kind of automatically. It's pretty scary stuff. And it's from the company Intellexa. And it's called Aladdin, which compromises specific people by just viewing a malicious advertisement. So this is another very important reminder that having an ad blocker enabled is part of just basic security nowadays. So make sure you're using an ad blocker. Speaking of Intellexa, it was also discovered that they had remote access to some of its government customer surveillance systems, which is a huge violation of so many different things, which is just more deep insight into how freaking scummy these like spyware companies really are. It's a really spooky industry. Check out the show notes if you want to learn more. On the topic of using ad blockers and how they can actually harm you, there's a new info stealer campaign that's abusing Google search ads to lure users into Grok and ChatGPT conversations that appear to offer helpful instructions but lead to installing this AMOS info stealing malware on Mac OS. So this is all just to install malware on your device, and again, it runs through ads. So please use an ad blocker. It's not just to prevent annoying things, it's actually an important part of keeping yourself more private, more secure, and giving yourself more digital ownership out there. And I know I'm saying this and I'm losing ad revenue as a result of it, and that's totally okay. Find other ways to support us and support other creators that you like. Up next, Google's fixed their 8th Chrome 0 day, so make sure that you're updating Chrome and other Chromium-based browsers like Brave as well, which probably have to deal with this too. There's a new Droid lock malware that locks Android devices and demands a ransom. So check out the show notes if you want to learn more about that. It's definitely just another reminder to watch what you install on your devices. There's a new phishing service that targets European banks called Spider-Man. So definitely watch out for this. And they're pretty much there to impersonate banks. So just in general, be very careful with sites that you visit. And I highly recommend using something like a password manager and just saving all your links for the first time there. And when you go to sensitive websites, you just click the link in your password manager instead of using a search engine and opening yourself up to anything like that. And if you get a notification in your text or your email, I also just go to my password manager, log into the service, and that way I can find a notice inside the account myself to see if it's legitimate. Pharma firm Innotiv discloses a data breach after a ransomware attack. For audio listeners, that's spelled Inotiv. It's quite awkward to say. So if you are in any way related to this company, definitely check that out. And finally, this is a pretty important one that is a global thing. It's from the FBI, but the FBI's warning of these virtual kidnapping scams using altered social media photos. AI tools are good at impersonating people. They're only getting better. This includes audio impersonations. This includes video impersonations. This includes image impersonations. And so it's really good for you to have a nice formal sit down conversation with your closest friends and family members and just kind of go through things that only you guys might say to each other in specific scenarios to try to avoid something like this. I actually know people personally have been impacted by things like this. And so it's a big, important thing to watch out for, and make sure to have like a secret password or something that any of you share to kind of verify. Like, and that way in a situation you can go, oh, maybe it's a question that you ask and the person has to know what to say. And if they don't respond to it properly, you know it's not legitimate. All right, and now we're going to get into the service updates of the week, and I like to leave it off on a positive note, so let's dive into these. The first is Proton has released Proton Sheets. I'm really excited about this. We've been using Proton Docs for a while for our scripts and stuff and our templates, and I'll probably be making a dedicated video on this in the short future, so that I can kind of showcase what it looks like for all of you. But yeah, there's a screenshot on the video, and for everybody listening, it's just typical Proton updates here, all end-to-end encrypted, all part of the same ecosystem, and it's part of Proton Drive. So I'm pretty excited about this. I still haven't tested it myself, but I'm definitely excited to. Next, there's a new air quotes anonymous phone carrier that lets you sign up with nothing but a zip code. This was actually started by Nicholas Merrill, who used to be the director of the Calix Institute. And then I believe he left. This is all based on memory, but I believe he left the Calix Institute. And it sounds like this might be the next thing he's pursuing. And so if you want to learn more about that, it seems like it's an MVNO, so you can sign up with very limited information. And so, yeah, go check that out if you're interested. Nextcloud put out a December maintenance update, and they talked about what's new in Nextcloud Hub 25. So check that out if you're a Nextcloud user. Firefox put out some updates. So now Translate the Web now works on iOS, so you can translate things on iOS, and it looks pretty awesome. So good job on them. And now you can customize your Firefox icon now on Android too. So you can go ahead and change any icons there, which is pretty cool. And on that topic, they kind of did a whole recap post. So you can check this all out down in the show notes. Tails is the live operating system that's geared towards anonymity, and also it's ephemeral. Like you unplug your flash drive and boom, it's all wiped. They released version 7.3.1. So check that out if you want to learn more. Brave has released AI browsing in Brave Nightly, which is available for early testing. I can't say this is something I'm looking forward to right now. I haven't found a use case for this, and it all sounds very intimidating and creepy. So I don't know if I'm going to be testing this, but if any of you are listening and you're like, man, I just love AI stuff and I just need an AI lion in my life, then you have this. If you're an audio listener, I say lion because Brave's logo is a lion. So yeah. Okay. So FreeBSD has a version 15 that's been released. So if you are a FreeBSD user, go check that out. It sounds like a major release for them. Homebrew is a package manager for macOS and Linux, but mainly known for its macOS side of things. But now you can install Flatpaks via Homebrew as well. This is actually really cool. Good stuff. I haven't dug too much into this one, but there's a new Jolla phone, Jolla, that's now available for pre-order as an independent Linux phone. So they go through kind of all the details, and it seems like it's pretty high powered. And yeah, it seems pretty nice. This one's interesting to me. I don't know if it's interesting to others, but Alma Linux is releasing something called a Media and Entertainment SIG. This is a special interest group. And pretty much the mission here is to have a production-ready Linux distro, essentially. They say their goal is to make Alma Linux the secure, stable, and high-performance platform the media and entertainment industry can build its future on. And they do detail kind of the video production tools they're looking to use. And I think this is really exciting as somebody who wants to see better professional tools accessible to people on Linux, especially for more professional use cases, right? Like it's easy for us to DIY a way to like, run this in a VM with unofficially with an unofficial license and boom, I got it to work and make a blog post about it, which is awesome. And I think it's cool those resources exist. But for businesses and enterprises, they actually need official support. They need 24/7 uptime. They need customer support, etc. And I think this is a great step to kind of build out that infrastructure. So I'm excited for that personally. Notesnook is now friends with Addy.io, who's an aliasing service. Notesnook is an end-to-end encrypted notes service. If you use Notesnook, you can get a discount on your Addy.io plan. So check that out if you use either of those. Mullvad VPN has dropped OpenVPN from the Mullvad app. This is not a huge surprise. They've already been heading in this direction, but they are dropping it. So that's pretty much that. This is also some somewhat positive news from Amazon of all people, but they've actually changed how copyright protection is applied to Kindle's direct self-published ebooks. So the TLDR here is that you can choose to offer DRM-free ebooks in the EPUB and PDF formats through its self-publishing platform, Kindle Direct Publishing. So if you're an author and you want to set your title as DRM-free, you can do that now. So I think this is a big step in the right direction. And finally, the last story of the week, we have Loops, which is, I believe, in beta. And it's essentially like TikTok, but federated. So if you know what PixelFed is, it's like Instagram, but federated and open source, and Loops is that for TikTok. And that, my friends, concludes this week's Techlore Surveillance Report. If this analysis helped you reclaim control, again, you can become a Techlorian by visiting the link down in the show notes. You'll gain access to our exclusive communities, get perks, all while keeping this podcast free and growing for all of you. Please also, if you're able to, take a moment to leave a rating, share this episode to spread digital freedom to others around you. And I just want to thank you all for listening and being here and learning something new on how to protect yourself. So I'll see you all in the next episode of Surveillance Report. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next week.